asked me favor. So, wait, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right. So thank you everybody for joining us on this amazing conversation that we're going to have about war, conflict, and ecology with Professor Masin. So as you all know, oh, sorry, there's someone who's asking for the link that cannot enter, so I'm going to send it real fast. All right, sorry. As you all know, we have been working on integral ecology project based on the framework of the Global Compact on Education, along with Laura, Jackie, and Megan, which they unfortunately couldn't join us because of the time zone difference in Australia, but they're here with us in spirit. So introducing Professor Masin. Professor Masin is a biologist, author, and activist. He's the founder and director of both the Palestine Museum of Natural History and the Palestine Institute of Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University, where he is also a teacher. Professor Masin is also a nominee of the Nobel Prize of Peace for 2025, so I think it's very nice that we're having this space to have this conversation with him, in which he's going to be able to talk to us about his work, what he's doing, and of course, the current situation that is going on in Palestine. So thank you so much, Professor Masin, for accepting our invitation, and you have the voice.
Thank you very much for having me. I'll try to be very brief. I'm not sure if you want to see some pictures, but I'm happy to maybe, well, never mind. I don't think it's necessary. So here I do a quick thing. I don't know if you see my screen. So obviously our region here in the Eastern Mediterranean region is a pivotal area. It's for human migrations out of Africa to the rest of the world. And essentially, this area also was the basis of rich biodiversity, which allowed it to be the first area with human agriculture and human domestication of animals about 12,000 years ago. The people of our region continued to live relatively in harmony with nature up until 1948, when the State of Israel was created to replace a country that was multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society and make it a Jewish State of Israel. That entailed a removal of 530 Palestinian villages and towns. You see them on the map on the right, and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And since then, of course, there has been an ongoing and methodical ethnic cleansing and genocide of our people. So far over 500,000 people have been killed. Indigenous people have been killed, and hundreds of thousands, over 900,000 injured. But there's also a cost in terms of the environment, and I want to talk briefly about the environmental impact. For example, diversion of the water of the Jordan River basin, which dried it up, basically caused desertification, and the river is no longer flowing as the river used to flow at 1,350 million cubic meters per year. Now it flows at less than 20 million cubic meters per year. It's basically a tiny stream. There was drainage of the wetlands of the Hula area in the north, which devastated the environment. 219 species disappeared. There is all sorts of damage to the environment for the sake of natural resources. For example, Israel is also now extracting gas off the coast of Gaza. That's why Gaza is under siege for the past 2 decades nearly, and is undergoing a complete destruction now as an area of people living. The Zionist movement had a goal not just of creating a Jewish state, but of having hegemony globally and on the Middle East especially, and being the link between Asia and Europe, as Netanyahu explained repeatedly, the Prime Minister of Israel. It has a strong interest in hegemony. To do this, they do all sorts of damage to our environment and to the local people, as I said. The damage in Gaza has been devastating. It's totally catastrophic, basically. We did some research studies on this, for example, by remote sensing. You can see here month by month for the first year of the latest ecocide, as I call it. On the right map, you can see month by month the destruction of tree cover. And in the graph, you can see the cumulative tree cover destruction. And in Gaza City and North Gaza, the damage is devastating. But this was up until September 2024. Since then, of course, there has been damage in the southern parts of Gaza, and we know now that Rafah is the southernmost district in Gaza is completely gone, both trees and buildings and people. War is also a climate change issue. Israel produced just in the first 60 days of the war more greenhouse gas emissions. I won't go through the details of this, but they produced more greenhouse gas emissions in the first 60 days than a country like a Central African Republic produced in greenhouse gases in 1 year from all their sources, be it cooking or cars or industries and so on. And now, of course, this is the first 60 days. Now we're talking about a year and a half. So you need to multiply that by 6, basically, in terms of the jet fuel emissions. And that's more than many European countries produce from all their sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, the post-conflict damage is devastating, and some of it is unrepairable, including unexploded munitions, white phosphorus residues, and depleted uranium residues, destruction to be repaired, stress on resources, etc. This is white phosphorus, what it looks like. So what do we do about all of this? We at our institute, the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, include a Museum of Natural History, Botanic Garden, Environmental Impact Assessment Unit. We have consultancy services on environmental issues. We do research, conservation, education, community service. This is our community garden, where children can also grow their own vegetables if they choose. We have a small museum of natural history. This is our educational activities, you can see, with the children. Probably should stop here, but this is our work with women to market their products, which we teach them how to produce products. This is our website, palestinenature.org, and you can email me at info@palestinenature.org for more information. I can also send you a video that we had just produced about our 10-year accomplishments. We just completed 10 years of work, and we have been remarkably successful, but we have scratched the tip of the iceberg in terms of what can be done, what should be done in our region to ensure sustainable human and natural communities, which is what we are after. So I'll stop here, and I'm happy to answer any questions in discussion.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
We do have plenty of time, so if you want to go into more detail on any of the things you exposed, it would be absolutely lovely. I'm very interested in the reports in the informs that you've been doing. For example, the one of the last year in which you had a very detailed information on how the genocide has affected also the natural part and the ecology of the Palestinian territory. And I think it's also very interesting to see what you're doing in order to like seed some hope. For example, with the children and being able to cultivate their own vegetables, to work with women. If you would like to go into more detail about that, I think it would be very, very good, unless there's also questions from the public, but we do have a lot of time. So if you want to tell us more about what is going on and what you are doing in the situation. It would be
Yeah, I will. My background, in addition to biology and biodiversity and the environment, is also in medical genetics. And in medicine, we say you have to take a patient history, then take symptoms, do some tests, and then make the right diagnosis to understand the etiology. And then you offer therapy, and then you tell the patient the prognosis, which is what's going to happen in the future based on therapy. Now, we're not prophets, of course, and what we do is we just give patients probabilities based on other patients. So what is the diagnosis here? Without going in detail about the symptoms, the environmental catastrophe that we are undergoing is a symptom. When Israel uprooted tens of millions of trees and planted only one kind of tree, which is pine tree, they uprooted all the diversity of trees and planted only pine trees. This is just a symptom of an underlying cause. What is this underlying cause? Well, the underlying cause, the etiology, if you want, is colonial, settler colonialism, displacement settler colonialism, if you want to be more specific of the kind of illness that we suffer from. Displacement settler colonialism is fairly common around the world. Many countries have suffered from it. And its symptoms include environmental destruction. I mean, I give you just a couple of examples that may be familiar to you. One is what happened to the landscape of the United States, what became known as the United States after the European invasion. How much of the virgin forests remain? How much of the indigenous people remain? How much of the wildlife that used to exist? How many species became extinct? How many invasive species were brought? I could repeat the same thing even in a worse situation in Australia. The British colonizers in Australia devastated the local environment and brought a lot of invasive species, and a lot of the local species disappeared. Now, why does that happen? Why does colonization by nature means destruction of local environments? Now, most colonization is European, and I won't go into detail about why this is now, but most colonizers come from Europe, be it in the Americas, South America, North America, Africa, Asia, whatever. Uh, okay, why would Europeans who go colonize other countries destroy the environment in those countries, including European Jews who came to us to establish the state of Israel? Well, it's very logical if you think about it. You come from Europe, you want to retain connectivity to Europe, you want to create a European environment. And where are you doing this European environment? In a country that's not Europe. South America is not Europe. North America is not Europe. Australia is not Europe. It had its own indigenous people, its own indigenous trees and plants, animals, etc. And you want to make it look European. You want to have your fox hunts, or you want to have whatever. You want to have a landscape that look European, have a lot of pine trees. So it makes sense that you reshape the landscape, you reshape the environment. That's precisely what happened in our case. So it's I look at things as a scientist, as a biologist, and as a medical person in this kind of analysis, not necessarily emotional, good, bad, or evil kind of thing. I think all humanity suffers from colonization, and now that we destroyed planet Earth, we're talking about colonizing Mars. I just hope there's no living forms on Mars that we are going to displace or destroy. So it's natural to do this. But this leads me to the issue of outcome, which is what we call prognosis. Prognosis in the case of colonization and the global environment. I mean, yesterday we had Earth Day. Earth Day was started to be commemorated, started in the 1970s, 1970 to be precise. So we've had 55 Earth Days. Every one of those years, the Earth climate and situation has gotten worse and worse. And we are on the brink of total catastrophe on Earth, and that's not counting the potentiality of a global nuclear war, which usually starts with a regional war. A regional war is already started in Palestine, the Middle East, if you want, the Arab world, Western Asia, as I prefer to call it. In Western Asia, there's a regional war ongoing. There's attacks and counterattacks by many powers, regional countries, states. The US, Britain, Germany are engaged in this war, which is a genocidal war against indigenous people. But there was some resistance from Lebanon, from Yemen, from Palestine itself. It may be futile resistance or small, but nevertheless, that's what you have. And Iran maybe get into the picture, and maybe soon Russia and China. And if it escalates into a global war like that, then the only winners in such a global war will be cockroaches because they're resistant to nuclear radiation. So we are in a very precarious position. I don't want to make it, I don't want you to be too depressed, because I think we still have a hope of averting this. Enough people are waking up to make a difference. There's global movements in universities, despite attempts to silence free speech, for example, in the US, dictating, the government dictating, they're basically saying you can curse God, you can attack God or anybody else, but you cannot attack Israel. You cannot speak about Israel or its genocide, or about that this genocide is funded by American taxpayer money. So there is, basically power on one side and counter force on the other side, and that is the reality that we face. So to be hopeful in bad times, as Howard Zinn once quipped, is not, is not lunatic or crazy. It's actually necessary to be hopeful. It is important to be hopeful. It is essential for our survival that we work, and we cannot work if we are despondent or despairing. So I've been working, since I returned from the US to Palestine in 2008. I've been working 7 days a week, 16 hours a day. I don't take vacations. And I'm doing all of this as volunteer for the past 16 or so years of my life. So, and that's the best decision I made in my life. And we continue to see resistance growing, as I said, around the world. I visited over 50 countries in the past 20, 25 years. And I see a tremendous shift in public opinion towards justice, towards human rights, towards sustainability. And sustainability is a big word, but it is a big, big issue if we don't. There's more plastics now in the ocean than there are actual fish in the ocean. So we really have to get our act together and quickly. And so there's an urgency to this, an urgency to save our planet. And Palestine perhaps is the good thing about what's happening, the silver lining, if you want, to this dark cloud on Palestine, is that it's dropping all the masks about international law, about democracies, about Western democracies. There's no Western democracies. There's no Western civilization anymore. Mahatma Gandhi was once asked, "What do you think of Western civilization?" He said, "I think it will be a good idea." So, yeah, I think it will be a good idea for us all to get civilized at some point. And perhaps when Linnaeus called us Homo sapiens, he was either a lunatic or too optimistic that we will be sane at some point. I think there is sanity beginning to creep into our psyche, and I hope it will spread very quickly. And I don't want to underestimate the urgency of the situation, but I think there's a lot of hope, and I'm optimistic. Hope this elaboration is good enough for you.
It is. It's so lovely to listen to you, Masin. Thank you so much for going into detail. I think it's very beautiful to listen to what you've been doing in the past years of your life, the hope that you see despite the urgency of the situation. And it's definitely very thought-provoking, and more than thought-provoking, it also evokes a lot of emotions, which I think are the basis for actually trying to do a certain change. So I don't know.
I
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of questions and
yeah.
for you. So
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add, yeah, that we're very, very honored to have you here and that we stand in solidarity. And I wanted to ask you about if you could talk more about the struggle for water and how you mentioned how the Jordan River was basically diverted. So if you could talk more about that situation, how it happened, and what are the consequences on Palestinian life, and what you're doing about water scarcity and yeah, and basically access to such fundamental element for life.
Yeah, I skipped over this slide about water, so let me just put it up again. And this one. We have no shortage of water in Palestine. Palestine is part of the Fertile Crescent, as I mentioned in the beginning, where humans first developed agriculture. Why? Because it has good rain and because it has good fertile soil. It was never a desert. It was always fertile country. Even in the Bible, which is full of myths and things like that, It says the Israelites came from the east to the land that was the land of milk and honey, the land of Canaan. So it was a land of milk and honey indeed. And so we have no shortage of water. There's more rainfall in Ramallah, as you see here, than there is in London. What we have is unequal distribution. The colonizers deprive us of water. The reason they diverted the Jordan River Basin is not that they needed the water. It's to deprive the local people of water. It's as simple as that. It's the substance of life. And they do this regularly. For example, as the graph shows, while the rainfall in Ramallah is fairly high, goes into the aquifer, Palestinians are not really allowed to use the aquifer. The water is extracted by Israel, and even Israeli occupiers sell us a little bit of the water. Our own water, they sell it to us. And so, and they use most of it. Sometimes they dump it even into the sea, or they use it for swimming pools and for green lawns and things like that. Whereas in any other country, like let's say London or whatever, water goes under the ground. It's used by the people of those countries or those regions. It's as simple as that. It's a deprival of the local people of water to basically cause them to be removed from the land, to die off, and to be ethnically cleansed. This is natural. It's as natural to colonization, not natural in the sense of good. It's natural to colonization in the same vein as the European colonizers in North America killed 2 million to 3 million buffaloes, as you know, to deprive the indigenous people of their food source. And they did block access to many water sources for Aboriginal people in Australia, for example. This is, again, expected as a symptom of colonization.
Thank you so much, Professor Masim. Valentina sent me a message and said she also wanted to ask a question. So go ahead, Valen. Feel free to open your microphone and turn on your camera.
And anyone else can use the feature of, raising the hand to participate.
Can you hear me all right, or is there like so much noise? Or is it okay?
I can listen. What about you, Masim?
Okay, is it here? Yes, it's good. Yeah. Okay, great. So my name is Valentina Ospina. I am a student in Geneva, and let me first congratulate you for the nomination of the to the Nobel Peace Award. It's of course enormous. Hopefully, we'll see who wins. Is either this thing or the Serbian students who protested against the regime. So my best agreements for that. I kind of mine is an intervention and a question because I specialize in these type of things. I specialize in conflict, diplomacy, and especially retribution and reconciliation efforts, especially in Latin America. But I'm also very interested in the cases of the Middle East, especially right now in Palestine and in Syria after the fall of Assad. And very interested to see how will that kind of unfold. But to the point, I wanted to bring up the question of kind of what is going to happen after the conflict. Right now, we are in the midst of conflict, and right now we see that the consequences are disastrous. The tons and tons and tons of debris, the existence of debris, the leveling of cities, this type of warfare has incredible amount of physical consequences, and of course it has psychological consequences to the population as well. Because when we talk about reconstruction processes, for example, in Syria after the fall of Assad, we see the need to reconstruct things physically first so that people have a physical space to kind of heal afterwards. But I don't see that happening anytime soon in the case of Gaza and Palestine. And it's very sad to kind of admit this because this type of warfare, the one that is like every region has different types of warfare. For example, the warfare that we see in Southeast Asia or Latin America is guerrilla type of warfare that kind of include the population in their strategies to safeguard them and the control of territory. But the warfare that we see in the Middle East is the complete leveling of cities, of towns, of hospitals, of first aid things. We have seen that this, like according to international humanitarian law, of course, there is a complete disregard for these type of things. You have pillages, you have starvation as a method of war that is, of course, illegal under the current things, under the current like framework. So then you have all of these kind of complete disregard for international law that is supposed to protect the population. And this leveling of cities, it will take decades to remove the debris that right now is in Gaza. So where people are going to go, where people are going to kind of, people are starting to think about peace talks and ceasefires and this type of things. But you cannot start to talk about any of these when they don't see each other as equals. And when people don't see each other as equals, like when the Israelis don't see Palestinians as equals, or don't even see them as human beings. And this is an experience I have had firsthand in my university, where Israeli students have told me face to face. We don't see them as equals. We don't see them as deserving of rights or of resources or these type of things. So these are very hard points to start from. And my question goes more in the things of resources. Every conflict is regarding resources. All of the conflicts have an economical standpoint. All of the conflicts have an economic reason for it. So when it comes to reconstruction, my question would be, how do you see the resources being either redistributed? How do you see this type of process of removing the tons of debris that there is? And of course, this has an enormous environmental impact. The land is not going to be fertile. People misconcept the Middle East as infertile land, but actually the lands where the Palestinians settle are some of the most fertile land that there is in this area. And this is why a lot of people, like, this is why they want to take it. They want to settle on these areas. So I just want to bring like this up because it's something that really takes energy out of my day when I really think about reconstruction processes and transitional justice and this type of thing, that the physical area is no longer there. It's inexistent, and people will, for many, many decades, no longer feel safe in Gaza or in Rafah or in these type of areas. And everything is good because of national pride. And it's true, and it is very sad to see how people just have to flee. So this has an enormous environmental impact. And then as well, bringing it more into philosophy, is the psychological impact of the kind of war things. There is the saying that is a land where you have to fight for is not your land, but a land that you die for is your land. So this type of psychological impact, like you have to analyze what it means to the core of a person to say that, to chant that, to kind of fight for this type of things, and what are the goals right now. So it's just to analyze the type of warfare that is being committed, what are the impacts on this, and the complete disregard for the actual rules of conducting modern warfare, and what is the impact that both philosophically on a population, long term, short term, and then just, I know that I'm extending myself a bit, but it's right now the current discussion of including the term ecocide in the Rome Statute. So we know that Israel is not part of the Rome Statute, but if the victims are, then there's an opening for that in that sense. So ecocide is kind of genocide, but for environmental causes. So this is also a discussion that should be open to see if people can if people advocate for these type of things, and if there could be potential rulings, court rulings in favor of an ecocide sentence against Israel. Sorry. Thank you. A
Well,
lot of ideas. I'm so sorry I extended myself.
yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say if you're interested and anybody else on this call is interested, I'm happy to work with you on research projects related to restitution, reconstruction, environmental justice issues, and in general, climate justice issues. There's thousands of research projects and writing projects that can be done. Data, some of the data is available, some of it we can acquire, some of it we can eventually acquire after hopefully this round of genocide and ecocide and medicide, destruction of the medicine and environment, and scholasticide, destruction of the universities. One of the volunteers that came to our institution published with me a paper on the scholasticide, the destruction of the universities in Gaza. Another volunteer published with me a paper on the destruction of the environment in Wadi Gaza protected area. I'm working now on issues of like white phosphorus and depleted uranium. But there are 1,001 issues that need to be investigated. I was asked by Maria about water, for example. It'd be nice to look at the water aquifer in Gaza and what happened to it and study that. So there's a lot of things to study. Having said that, I am not obviously an expert in all these areas that I mentioned, but I like to research things, and depending on the interest of the volunteers and interns, and you don't have to come here to volunteer, by the way, you can volunteer from where you are. I put my email in the chat room if anybody wants to contact me. Actually, go ahead and email me, even if just to say hi, and so that I can have your email address and add it to our email addresses, where I put, weekly emails. I send about actions that people can do about the environment, about justice, about human rights, etc. Now, regarding the issue of international law, as you may be familiar, there's a set of post-Second World War, there was a set of development of what they call international law. There's international human rights laws or international humanitarian law. There's international law regarding conflict, wars, even though I really don't like to use the term conflict or war in this context. I mean, in Australia, it was not a conflict or a war between the Aborigine people and the British colonizers. It was a colonization and ethnic cleansing and genocide. Those are the right terms to use. But anyway, there's also international environmental law, so to speak. So what's the status of all these laws? All of them are being trashed and have been trashed since 1945. Since even the US started right away after the Second World War, if you know, in Cambodia in the 1950s, and other places committing violations of these laws. Why can they get away with violations of international law? Because they have a veto power at the UN. And nobody can implement international law without the US and the great powers who wrote these laws. I mean, you can imagine they wrote the laws to benefit themselves, not to be applied to them or their client states like Israel or Saudi Arabia. I mean, look at what Israel is doing. Look at Saudi Arabia, kleptocracy, basically, that funds the US and sends money to Israel, etc. It was set up by the British as a monarchy, kleptocracy. Look at Israel, an apartheid state, 10 times worse than what South Africa was under apartheid. And it gets away literally with mass murder and an extermination campaign that's ongoing as we speak. Just in the past, just actually since this morning, in in the Gaza Strip, 39 people were killed. Half of them were children. So every day there's a dozen or 2 dozen children are butchered, and butchered in the most brutal way. For example, by incendiary bombs on the tents that they are sleeping in, where their whole families and the children are burned alive. This is happening as we speak on a daily basis. With the information available on the internet, anybody wants to watch gory videos, I'm happy to send you if you want, or just Google or go on YouTube or Facebook or TikToks or Instagrams, and you will find these things. So I personally don't think much of the global order as it was created after 1945. There's actually more people killed since then, since 1945, by genocide, by killings from the Western governments, especially the United States, than killed in the three major global wars, the Crimean War, the World War I, and World War II. So, and Israel has used more bombs on Gaza than was used by the US on Vietnam in terms of tonnage of bombs. So, you see, there's an issue here of credibility when we talk about international law. International Court of Justice issued the ruling that Israel should stop the genocide. Well, Israel just said, I don't care. And the US said we should sanction the International Court of Justice and also International Criminal Court, which issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and for his so-called defense or war minister. So what does that leave us? It leaves us with people power. And if you think about it, that's the only thing that have saved humanity in the past, that have ended injustices in the past. It was not governments or international law or international norms or anything like that. It was people power. And so if you think just in the US, for example, since I was in the US for a quarter of a century, if I think about the history of the United States, or for that matter, Switzerland, what are the positive things that happened in the history of that country, of any country, and how did those things happen? In the US, how did we get to end the war on Vietnam? How did we get civil rights? How did we get women right to vote, which was only in the 1920s? How did we have ending US support for apartheid in South Africa? How did we get 40-hour work week, unionization laws, etc.? All of the positive things happen in societies by people power. And so do not underestimate your power. Do not rely on international norms or laws or anything like that. That's not what is going to save us. And this leads me to one last thing, which is, since it was mentioned 3 or 4 times, which is the words conflict resolution. Again, I don't like the word conflict because it implies, like I have a conflict with my neighbor on where the fence should be, or my neighbor is throwing trash over to my side or something. That's not what we have. What we have and historically had a system of oppression, genocide, wars. Read, books like the one which talks about Edward Said's books or Noam Chomsky's books or many other books. The Wretched of the Earth, as you know, is a good book on colonialism. There was no conflict in Congo when the German government butchered hundreds of thousands of people. There was not the German, sorry, the Belgian government in Congo, the Belgian genocide. It was for chocolate. That's what it was for. That's why Belgian chocolates are famous. In Germany, in Namibia, it was about colonization. It was not a conflict between some neighbors or something like that. So conflict resolution is not something I think we should contend with as an issue of solving a conflict between two semi-equal parties that are just fighting over something that we don't understand what they are fighting about. Well, we understand it very, very well. We have 180 countries that undergone this colonization and decolonization process. And we know what happened in those countries from South America, Central America, Caribbean islands, Canada, Mexico. Switzerland is a country that was colonized. You know that, right? Why do you have part of Switzerland speaking Italian? The Romans were there, So what happened there? You have to decolonize. You have to have people live together after a process of decolonization sets in, and then you go through this process, and that depends on people power again. Not depends on somebody from outside or international law or UN Security Council coming and telling you what to do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor Masin. Does anyone else here have any question to Professor Masin? Or is there something you want to say?
Wow.
I cannot hear you well, Laura.
In the meanwhile, while others think about questions, I wanted to continue to talk about sort of alternatives or solutions, and I was wondering, what do you think about the proposal of, would it be a solution to have a two-state solution or one-state solution? Or maybe there is another solution, that from Palestine you're thinking about. But I sort of wanted to know your opinion about that, and also how to, for example, in the case of the Jordan River, right? How to do some sort of ecological restoration, also to the biodiversity, to the plants biodiversity in Palestine, how to do that.
Thank you for the questions, both of them. Regarding the quote-unquote solution, I use the term therapy actually because solution implies a problem that's delimited and understood. Therapy implies you have an issue that you want to get over. And what is the issue? Again, my diagnosis, which I hope you all agree with, is displacement settler colonialism. So how do we look at therapies for displacement settler colonialism? Well, before we apply therapy, we look at other patients and see what happened to them. And colonialism around the world, as I said, is very common. Every country suffered from it. There's not a single country that escaped this diagnosis. So what happened to all these other countries? Well, there's three possible scenarios, not solutions. One scenario is what happened in Algeria, where 1 million French packed their bags and went to Europe. I don't say back to Europe because there were 6, 7, or 8 generations in Algeria. Some of them have never seen France in their lives before, and they had to go. It was very bloody, cost something like 2 million Algerian lives killed. Genocide, basically. That's one scenario. It's very rare. A second scenario is what happened in Australia and the United States, which is outright genocide of the indigenous people, where there's 1 or 2% of them left. And the colonizers have most of the country and run it, and the indigenous people who haven't given up. I mean, the Aborigine people, I visited with them, the indigenous people in America, Native Americans, etc., are still there, are still struggling, and they keep hope alive. That's scenario 2. And both scenario 1 and scenario 2 are rare. Rare in the sense of you can count on one hand the countries that have it. The third and most common scenario is what happened in the rest of the world. And that is 170, 180 countries who had this outcome, which is that the descendants of the colonizers and the descendants of the colonized live in one country. Notice I use the word country, not one state. Why? Because you started your question by speaking about one state versus 2 states. Versus many states, I don't care, but the word state is a European concept, the concept of nation state that was initiated by Europe after the collapse of empires, like the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed. So we had Austria, Hungary, Germany, Poland, etc. And this was a European stage of development. And they imposed it on us here in our region via the Sykes-Picot agreements. I don't want to go into history too much, but in 1916, the British and the French decided to create what's called nation states in Western Asia. We never had nation states here, so they imposed it on us and drew literally lines in the sand and lines in forested areas and lines everywhere else, and said, this is Lebanon, this is Palestine, this is Jordan, this is Iraq, this is Kuwait. This is in the sense of divide and conquer for colonizers, of course. So that's why I don't like to speak about states and nation states. If you ask my own personal opinion, I think the concept of nation state is already too old and needs to be changed, and is already changing. Even Europe, actually, that's why they have a European Union. They decided that the concept of nation states as such, with fixed borders fighting the next nation state next to it, is not a good system to keep, especially after the First and Second World War. So they moved towards the European Union concept. Anyways, so I don't like to speak of a solution as one state, 2 states. I wrote a book titled Sharing the Land of Canaan. If you want, that details what I foresee the future here. It's available on my website, which is kumsiya.org. It's right there in the chat room. So you can look at it in detail about how we share the country, not necessarily having a state or 2 states or 5 states. Based on human rights, of course. Now, regarding biodiversity, we have lots of ideas, of course, and we have programs for reconstitution of the country. We have ideas. I'm working even on soil remediation research. There's much that we can research, we can do, as I said, and I look towards you helping us. You can help us. You don't have to help us financially, although I welcome financial donations. I got actually a grant from Switzerland for a seed bank. It's very important for developing a seed bank for the indigenous seeds in Palestine, both wild seeds and domestic seeds. So we welcome donations, but more importantly, if you can donate your time, which is the most precious thing we have in life. We have limited lifespan, so we need to use our time effectively. So if you want to help, you can donate your time either from abroad or come here, and I'll show you many, many ways you can bring us all towards sanity and sustainability, not just for Palestine, I'm talking about also for Europe, for North America, for everywhere else. We should probably wrap it up. It's 11 o'clock at my time, and I have to get up at 6 in the morning.
Sure thing. I don't know if there's any last question or short comment for Professor Massin before we wrap it up, or if I should finish. So, Professor Massin, thank you so much for your time. I think it was very, very interesting to listen to you. I think not only me, but all of us learned a lot about the situation, about everything else. It was also very charming to listen to you. And I think that it awakened a lot of feelings and thoughts, and also a lot of options that we can do, and also for us to help. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your disposition, and we're looking forward to listening to you again.
My email list, do send me an email at info@palestinenature.org.
Awesome. So thank you for keeping the option open for us to contact you again. And thank you. I hope you have a great day tomorrow. So thank you everyone who assisted also to our conversation. So
Thank you
so
very
much.
Thank you very much, Professor Massin. It was a great pleasure to have you. And we learned a lot, and yeah, the invitation is on the table for anyone who wants to collaborate and contact you.
We have good, we offer volunteers who come to Palestine room and board, and we have very good food. You will never go hungry. You will enjoy really good hospitality. So you're welcome to come. And it's a life-changing experience in Bethlehem, birthplace of Jesus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Massin.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye. Thank you.